provide great opportunity for all of us within the industry and certainly here within Canada. Now, of course, a brief history of cannabis. As I mentioned in many of my presentations, cannabis has really been used medicinally really since the beginning of recorded history. Even going back to about 7,000 BC in ancient China, we see evidence of cannabis being used medicinally. Certainly, we see written records and history going back about 2,700 BC in Chinese folklore that cannabis was used. Its oils, tinctures, and preparations have been used for various therapeutic purposes. Now, here in the U.S., actually, cannabis was a medicine and included in what we call the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. This is a compendium or a list of all medicines. And certainly in 1850 of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, you can find evidence of cannabis being used medicinally, and this lasted right up until 1942, a few years after the Marijuana Prohibition Act back in 1937. But the U.S. Dispensary, which is another medical reference manual for doctors, showed that cannabis would be able to be used to induce sleep, to decrease muscular spasm, stir quiet the central nervous system, and also to relieve pain. And certainly from the U.S. Dispensary, over time, many more indications. You can see all these amazing medical indications listed up here on the slide that cannabis had been used for. And all the major pharmaceutical companies at the time were actually able to import cannabis indica from India. Certainly this is quite interesting that Park Davis worked to create a new varietal called Cannabis Americana on Eli Lilly's farm out in Indiana, and certainly many great potential indications, as you can see here on the slide. Now, Cannabis Americana, that was very interesting. During World War I, Eli Lilly and others had the supplies of cannabis indica cut off to the U.S., so they decided to grow cannabis on their own farm. And here, pictured in Indiana, I believe it was, a 156-acre farm where they were actually growing cannabis. So this was Eli Lilly, the very well-known pharmaceutical company, and here is a nice picture, and certainly this nice mission-style building still stands today. Now, Eli Lilly, Eli Lilly himself did a wonderful comparison study comparing cannabis sativa to cannabis americana. This was published, and certainly interesting piece of folklore in terms of U.S. Cannabis history. A number of cannabis medicines were offered by various pharmaceutical companies. In 1935, Eli Lilly had 23 different types of cannabis-based medicines listed in their manual. And a huge number of other companies that were certainly involved. We unfortunately wound up with an unfortunate passage of the Marijuana Tax Act back in 1937 and cannabis's demise, but certainly on a trip over to Amsterdam, I was able to photograph some old-time cannabis-based medicines. And again, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 basically ended the use of cannabis medicinally, but even so, on the National Institutes of Health side, research continued. And back in 1940, Dr. Roger Adams in his laboratory was first able to isolate CBD, and this led to a U.S. government patent on the isolation of CBD that was actually awarded in 1942. So CBD was really the first discovered cannabinoid molecule. Now, in 1964, Dr. Raphael McCoolum, a wonderful researcher from Israel, was able to actually isolate the THC molecule and determine its chemical structure, and he confirmed all of Dr. Adams' previous work, and certainly he's done some great things over time to help promote cannabis as a medicine. Many of you, of course, know about CBD being known as the hippie's disappointment. Of course, if you were to go to the 1960s, try to smoke a cannabis joint with a high concentration of CBD, there was no psychoactive effect. So for many years, CBD, of course, became known as the hippie's disappointment. But we changed the game. We thought if we did this differently, extracted the oils, made finished products where patients could get a fixed amount, maybe 25 or 50 milligrams CBD per serving, that there might be some therapeutic value. So we went ahead and contracted with some European farmers to start growing a high concentration of CBD in a hemp crop. They'd already been growing hemp for decades, generations, and even centuries. And certainly now we have a new purpose for them to grow hemp. And over a 4-year time period, we grew a higher and higher concentration of CBD in that European hemp crop. By the fall of 2011, we thought we had a high enough concentration to be somewhat therapeutic. So we went ahead, did our harvest, our extraction, took the CBD-rich hemp oil from Europe back to the U.S., and had our first products on U.S. and world markets going back to the spring of 2012. Now, just for the newcomers, certainly the difference between hemp and marijuana, very visually apparent here. You can see hemp will grow very tall, as high as 10 to 20 feet, in a very short 90 to 120 day growing cycle. Marijuana, on the other hand, grows very short and bushy. Hemp, of course, has tremendous industrial use around the world. Certainly, we're quite excited about the hemp seed nutrition, etc. Marijuana, on the other hand, though it's federally illegal, 33 of our U.S. states have approved its medical use. If we look at the markets, and I did just mention a few moments ago about Forbes projecting this year, 2019, $1.2 billion worth of sales in the CBD market. Well, if we look at the overall cannabis picture here in the U.S., between the legal markets in Colorado, Washington, even here in California, and then the black market throughout the U.S., we project that to be about a $120 billion annual marketplace. So CBD is just only taking a small 1% sliver of that pie. But we do expect this to grow over time now that certainly CBD has become more legal. Everywhere you look, CBD is just about everywhere, according to the New York Times, according to CNN, according to Time Magazine. And certainly we believe that peak sales, CBD under this scenario, might represent as much as $50 billion a year annually, almost 50 times growth. But then, of course, if we were to get the legalization of overall medical use, say for cannabis, for example, we expect many more people to come over into the cannabis sector. Many are going to find that you don't have to get the high to get the health benefits. And we believe that the CBD market at the peak might even approach as much as $100 billion in annual sales, or almost 100 times from where we currently are today. So certainly this has great potential benefit. And of course, hemp being brought back as a full-on industrial crop here in the U.S., an agricultural crop, certainly would be tremendous benefits for mankind. We're quite excited about all the tremendous industrial uses, your clean biofuels, your hemp textiles, your hemp-based bioplastics. Certainly the hemp building construction material has great application, particularly here in California, where we have a very dry summer season, a lot of fires, particularly in Northern California. Hemp is totally fire resistant as a building material, and of course your hemp board, hemp concrete, hemp insulation material are fantastic. And I mentioned a little bit yesterday about the electrical properties of hemp. Certainly this new application of hemp batteries and supercapacitors over the next 3 to 5 years is going to revolutionize the way we think about energy storage. And certainly we believe some of the etheric, the electrical properties of hemp, the way we've been able to preserve them in our products, are what really differentiates some of our therapeutic benefit. And of course, our hemp seed and hemp food as nutrition is quite exciting. Now, in terms of cannabinoid science, my gosh, it's unfortunate that this amazing discovery of the endogenous cannabinoid system going back to the late 1980s, maybe the most profound discovery in the history of medicine, and it still isn't even taught in medical school. Unfortunately, we're still operating back in like a 1940s paradigm. Anything new is very difficult to get through the medical community. So even doctors aren't really aware of this internal endogenous cannabinoid system, which actually turns out to be our largest self-regulatory system in the entire human body. So doctors have to come to many of our seminars and symposiums to get an education. And of course, in other parts of the world, countries such as Mexico and Brazil, medical doctors do write full-on prescriptions. And coming up here May 1st, we have about 100 doctors from Brazil coming into the U.S. to have a nice one-day full medical cannabis symposium to learn about some of this amazing science. But what are these cannabinoids? These are actual compounds, special compounds that are found in the cannabis plant family. Many other plants actually express cannabinoids as well. But generally, our products, you might find as much as 60 to 80 different cannabinoids in trace amounts. And certainly, medical science has now identified 146 different cannabinoids. In addition, the cannabis plant is so widely expressed in many other therapeutic compounds, things such as your terpenoids, your flavonoids, plant waxes, chlorophyll, and these all act synergistically together. These terpenoids also have very strong therapeutic value. Many of these terpenoids actually enhance the performance of the cannabinoids. And here's a nice picture description that you can look at some of these entourage botanicals. Now, within the human body, we have all these amazing systems that we regularly know: our muscular system, skeletal system, circulatory system, nervous system, lymphatic system. And as I mentioned, back in the late 1980s, we did discover this internal endogenous cannabinoid system, as well as an entire electrical circulatory system. And it's really interesting that hemp and our products feed both of these new systems that have been recently discovered. So again, the endogenous cannabinoid system, the largest self-regulatory system in the human body, governing a wide range of therapeutic processes, everything from our sleep, mood, appetite, the digestion of our food, hormone production, even our metabolism falls in here. And certainly we have receptors, our CB1 and CB2 receptors. CB1 greatly expressed throughout the brain, the most widely expressed of all the brain's neurotransmitter receptor sites. Expressed throughout the brain, the spinal column of the central nervous system. The CB2 receptor, widely expressed throughout the gut, the viscera, the internal organs of the body, relating to the body's immune function. And besides these endogenous cannabinoid receptor sites, a huge number of other receptor sites in the human body, very accepting of cannabinoids. These G protein coupled receptor sites, very technically, for those of you in the medical community will recognize these, but certainly these receptor sites control the function of about 800 human genes, or 4% of our overall genomic sequence. So targeting these receptors, very, very important. The GPR3 receptor, very good relationship with Alzheimer's. GPR6, strong relationship with Parkinson's, but this GPR55 is actually now being called the new CB3 receptor for its profound influence. Dr. Orrin Devinsky, who's a great cannabis-based researcher from New York University Hospital, he did all the studies on the pharmaceutically developed Epidiolex. Dr. Devinsky credits CBD's action on this GPR55 particular receptor site as the reason why the seizure disorders are coming down so nicely in children with epilepsy, and for this, it's being called the new CB3 receptor. Our bodies also have what are called vanilloid pain receptors. Very technically, these are called TPRV1, TRPV1 receptors. Those in the medical community will realize that and understand this, but certainly these cannabinoids have a tremendous effect on these pain receptors to help modulate and decrease the body's pain response. And of course, all our internal organs have cannabinoid receptors. Our internal glands have cannabinoid receptors as well, and the endogenous cannabinoid system is really present from day 16 of the developing fetus and is intimately involved in the development of the fetus as well as its central nervous system. Now here's a nice picture description of where the CB1 receptors are located in the brain, mostly the midbrain region, and we're very excited about two areas in particular, the hippocampus and the amygdala. I was talking yesterday a little bit about this new concept of neurogenesis that CBD is able to confer, and certainly these particular areas of the brain are where these stem cell-like activities seem to be coming from. It's also interesting to note that THC, though it's a wonderful pain-relieving molecule for many individuals, THC does not have this effect. So really CBD is the one that's going to produce this neurogenesis type of an effect. But this nice picture here will help you to understand this unfortunate opioid crisis we have in our society today. Now, this nice gold circle area is kind of where you find the opioid receptors. The opioid receptors were actually discovered back in the 1970s, and Dr. Candace Pert, a very interesting PhD researcher, found these opioid receptors to be back in the back of the brainstem, in the pons and the medulla oblongata area. And particularly right here, you also have the opioid receptors, and also in this area, you have what's called the body's autonomic breathing reflex. So we normally just breathe throughout the day. We don't really think about it much. We go to sleep at night. We continue to breathe. But what happens when patients overdose on opioids is that the sensation is so strong right near this particular nerve complex, this autonomic breathing reflex, that actually shuts off this reflex. And so what happens with the opioid overdose patients is that they just simply forget to breathe and die of asphyxiation. And my gosh, we're losing almost 100 Americans every single day to this particular crisis. 2015, more than 1/3 of our U.S. adults were prescribed opioids. It's just a terrible calamity. And of course, opioid use is much lower in the U.S. cannabis-friendly states. We see a significant 30% lower incidence, presumably because patients can combine higher dose cannabinoid with a lower dose, safer